Hello and welcome back to Lost in the World. Today we are doing a Ghost of Tsushima Legends review. Ghost of Tsushima Legends was the free expansion released by Sucker Punch to the brilliant Ghost of Tsushima single player game, which by the way has only got 83% on Metacritic at the moment from critic reviews. I think somebody's been smoking the funny stuff. But all in all, Ghost of Tsushima the single player game was an utterly brilliant ending to the PlayStation 4 game cycle. A fantastic storyline about honour, pride and loyalty. But enough about the single player campaign. Ghost of Tsushima Legends is its own game in its own right, and actually borrows a lot from Destiny and other looter style games. Now don't let that put you off. Ghost is a very different beast altogether. And that's not me knocking Destiny. Destiny has a lot of very good points, and Legends is very clever about borrowing the best bits from Destiny and narrowing it down to a very refined game. Now those of you familiar with Destiny's power leveling mechanics will be at home here pretty quickly, as well as those familiar with the end game cycle that Destiny has. This involves a couple of missions that are at a much higher difficulty with modifiers, as well as the raid, with the highest power level gear and some of the best gear being stuck behind the Nightmare difficulty and the raid, which is the same as the Destiny Nightfall difficulties. Now I have no problem with progression being gated like that. I think it's one of the main incentives for you to go out and consistently loot and get gear. So it's all in all, it's a system that works and really ties in well with Tsushima's very good combat mechanics. Okay, so let's talk about the power curve then in Legends. So you start obviously at a base character, you do a few missions and you slowly start getting gear. Now, like a lot of games in this genre, you do repeat the same missions at higher difficulties regularly to keep getting better gear. You've got bronze, silver and gold, then followed by nightmare. Now you have a survival mode and a story mission mode. The survival mode is very long in the tooth if I've got to be honest. At the higher difficulties, at almost 25 waves, survival mode can take you up to 45 minutes and actually give you the same rewards a story mission would give you, which can normally take anything between 10 and 20 minutes. So automatically, that seems like a bit of a bad design choice there, giving survival mode the same gear drops in terms of amounts of gear as the story mode. But ultimately, the feeling of getting power is very good in Legends. You do feel yourself getting stronger, and you do feel the different perks and build possibilities really add up as you get towards the end game. And that's brilliant really for a game that is given away for free. It does near the core mechanics of a loot style game by having good loot, by having clear progression, by having a clear end game goal for you to try these new items in and new builds in, with 4 classes which generally split the main skills of your main character in the single player game into 4 separate classes. There's a lot to do here, and a lot of the loot does spread across the different classes, so all you got to do is level up the skills of the different classes and you can take them straight into the end game as well, which is fantastic really. You don't have to start all the way again at the beginning. There's a lot of crossover there, which does allow for you to experiment with different builds and play styles. Legendaries really do make a difference, and getting them is a great moment. The fact that there isn't any PvP here does let Sucker Punch experiment nicely with some of the perks. I would like to show you off a load of the legendaries, but as you know, Iron Jesus hates me, and these are the 2 legendaries I've got. But just a quick one on the second one. Looking at legendary perk there, it does really push into the healer fantasy of playing a Ronin, and it's fantastic, and it's an item that really did allow me to mould my Ronin into a pure healer. And here's the katana, the legendary katana, which gives you Heavenly Strike, which is one of the abilities from the single player game, and allows you to switch stances, which not all the weapons have. So these drops, they really do make a difference to your playstyle and the power fantasy and the role fantasy that Legends allows you to get into. Now going towards the end game, it's important to really have a look at what that consists of. As often in looter games, there's a lot of repetition, so really the core mechanics of the game will set it apart, as well as the loot and the power fantasy available to you at the end game really define whether or not it's a game that will die pretty quickly once you get to the end game, or does it something that lives on for a while. Now with the caveat that Sucker Punch are probably tired by having to produce a sequel for Tsushima, I would say the end game is pretty good for a free game. And that's one thing when reviewing a game like this. Do you review it from the standpoint of a standard looter game, or do you review it from the standpoint that it's a free edition? And I think that's going to be down to individual reviewers and different people. I'm trying to sort of sit on the fence between the both. I think you have to judge it as a game in its own right, but also you do have to give a nod to the fact that this is a free game. So towards the end game, you do start getting Oni characters which have very large health bars, but their own movesets, and it's a different type of fight. So it's really good that it switches up the way the game plays, and it's not just simply about parrying anymore. You have to dodge from AoE attacks, as well as from large sledgehammer attacks that can poison you and debuff you. And that's a good switch up, really. Now these Oni enemies do really push into the whole mythology that Legends has about mythological Japanese demons. And you get a lot of enemies with superpowers, and that's great. It's something different from the single player campaign, and it does allow for Sucker Punch to add different mechanics to the game, and thus making the end game different and definitely a breath of fresh air. Not that the single player needs a breath of fresh air, but it's just nice that they've pushed the artistic style differently and the gameplay style differently. Finally we get onto the raid. Now whenever I hear about a game having a raid, for me that's a pinnacle activity, and it needs to be special and memorable. Sometimes I think companies are getting into the habit of possibly using the word raid to get a lot of hype, and really things not living up to the whole idea of a raid. Ghost does it pretty well, in all honesty. Having played through the raid beginning to end, I'd say overall it's a solid effort, and again caveating it with this is a free game. The first chapter is a nice introduction to the overall mechanics that you'll be using towards the raid, and the second one adds a few extras to that. The final boss fight is a fantastic culmination of the previous two chapters and is definitely memorable. I definitely was taken aback when I first went into the boss room and saw the boss. I hadn't had any spoilers beforehand, and I'm a big time Destiny raider, and I felt, due to the fact that I'd played so many Destiny raids, a lot of the mechanics were very familiar to me. There was nothing really massively different. However, if you've never played a raid on a console game, it'll be a pretty memorable introduction to raiding, and will maybe give you that kind of urge to go forward and do more raids in other games. But overall, again, fantastic effort for people who never played raids in other games. WoW, Destiny, or Division. I think the Division raid was very good. Going back to my previous point, I think you'll be suitably impressed by the whole experience, and it's difficult. It's not easy. Wipes will take you back to the start screen. You do get to save at the end of every chapter, and you do unlock chapters going further forward. But yeah, it's not easy, and it will require coordination and teamwork. Okay, so overall then, I'm pretty impressed by what Sucker Punch have put out here for free. Any niggles, any problems, any slightly annoying things? I'd say the camera doesn't quite hold up to the level of action that you get in Legends. It's basically a horde mode in survival, and there's a lot of enemies at you, and the camera does struggle to keep up at times. In story mode it's a lot easier, where there's a lot more tighter areas, and the camera does manage okay in the story mode. In the raid I felt also at times the camera did struggle a little bit. Other than that though, it's a solid effort. You've got a fair breadth of story missions to constantly repeat at higher difficulties. You get the weekly nightmares of the rewards, the weekly raid resets. And if you really want to get into min-maxing, it is there for you to do. The whole combat mechanics of Ghost from the single player are just brilliant, and there's a really great feeling about parrying and killing enemy, or getting behind them and stealthing and killing them. And that carries over into this, and it's basically Ghost of Tsushima's single player combat with loot and with loot grinding, and it really is, it works well. My biggest fear is that really going forward there won't be much more content added to this, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's not really a knock on Sucker Punch. My assumption is here, as I've said previously, they will be producing a sequel for the PS5 for this game. If they do add more content, then absolutely fantastic. Overall, I've got to say it's a fantastic effort by Sucker Punch. I don't have many gripes with the game. Once you do get to that end between 105 power and 110 power, is there a lack, or is there a need to really go on further forward and play more? Maybe not, but really, for what they do and what it is, it's a great effort. And if you're just needing a bit more Ghost of Tsushima in your life, give it a go. And if anything, it'll make you go back and play the single player campaign on New Game Plus. And if everyone goes and does that, then I don't think anyone will complain. Overall, I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on Ghost of Tsushima Legends. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your time. If you can hit a like and subscribe, it really helps us out. Other than that, stay safe and look after yourselves.